Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to host Wayne Haber with me today. We are going to discuss GitLab strategies about working with distributed teams and ensuring high performance. GitLab is the example that I follow since years back when it comes to how to work effectively in a remote setting. Asynchronous work is something that they have pioneered, and it's becoming much more present with companies lately. So these are all of the things that I want to dive deep in, and anything in addition to this that GitLab does well, which all of us can learn from. You can use the Q&A section to share your questions. I will make sure to include them in the conversation and answer as many as possible. And not to delay this further, Wayne, welcome and thank you so much for accepting my invite.
Hi, Katarina. Looking forward to it.
Great. So let's kick it off with a quick introduction. Maybe tell us a bit about yourself, your role, and then we can talk more about GitLab and the teams that you work with.
Absolutely. So I've worked in a couple of different industries, including healthcare and security, and am now at GitLab. Been at GitLab about 4 years now, a little more than 4 years, leading the engineering teams that work on security, compliance, and also growth features, with a team of approximately 80 people, spread out. I looked recently over 14 time zones. And which makes it a lot of fun for hiring, where we can hire in so many different areas of the world, and also on making sure we do asynchronous communication as much as possible so that we can really make everyone a full member of the team. So the security features are to scan customers' code for security issues, so they can find them as early as possible and fix them as early as possible. Also, the govern features which are around compliance, both with working with security issues and understanding and compliance configuration, security policies, and things like that, and also growth, which is a smaller team. There's a really interesting team as well that does quote unquote growth hacking to do small experiments to increase revenue, like to encourage more signups or encourage more users who've signed up to activate licenses, etc.
Interesting. And you mentioned 14 time zones. Hiring across so many countries opens up a lot of bigger pool of potential talent, but also brings in a lot of challenges. So can you describe a bit the process that you're following when it comes to setting up the team processes, operations, asynchronous work, and also
One thing
hiring
that
procedures?
Yeah, that's great. So one thing that we do, I guess I'll start with hiring, is that we have a very structured hiring process. So for engineers, for example, they they apply for the role. We have a recruiter look through the applications for potential fit, and then they'll do a screening call with the candidates. And sometimes it's not the recruiter for the role will do the screening for the candidates, because the recruiters, only work in one area of the world, and the candidates may be elsewhere. So we have recruiters in various parts of the world to make it so that we can do those screening calls. We then send a technical test. It's a take-home technical test, and it's in the language or languages that the candidates know. We don't like doing real-time coding tests. We don't think that has a lot of value, and it doesn't really approximate the real work. So they get the test, which is some example of real work. Edit this code, fix it, add a feature to it, and tell us what else you do to it. Make it more performant, higher, easier maintainability, etc. And then the interview, which we have interviewers spread across the world as well, will be discussing the work the person did, not watching them do it live. Then we also do a behavioral interview with and values fit interviews with a peer, with the hiring manager, and also with the manager's manager. And then we go through a process for managing offers and background checks and things like that. And we spread this across the world, making sure the interviewers are as diverse as possible, both geographically and by other measures. So we're getting the candidate has a great experience with us, and we have a very diverse view of opinions when we make the decisions. Each interviewer also writes really good notes. We're really big on writing notes and documenting things, which is how we survive and thrive as a all remote company. Is they not only write up their notes, we have scorecards looking at these categories and those categories and those categories to make sure we cover everything. And at the end, each interviewer gets a vote of basically no, yes, or strong yes. And our rule in engineering is the candidates need to get 2 strong yes votes. So it's easier to get a yes. It's hard to get a strong yes. So that's how we do that. In terms of making the teams really thrive, we don't geolocate a team in a region, even though we have people across the world. One of the groups on our team says 8 people, and I think they're in 6 time zones, of which many of them have 0 time zone overlap. So what we do to make that work is we work as asynchronously as possible, which is not any one big thing. It's a large number of small things. It's things like write everything down, communicate primarily in writing when you can. When you have meetings, make sure meetings have an agenda, of course, but also make it so that in the meetings, you never review content live. People are expected to review the content, whether it's slides or a preview video or a merge request, etc., in advance, and bring their questions and comments to the meeting. And we'll take really good notes during the meetings, both during the meeting and before it. So people who can't make the meeting, because at GitLab all meetings are optional, if you can't make the meeting for whatever reason, you can put your notes in. We'll actually verbalize it. Someone else will volunteer to read what you said, and we'll respond there. And we also record most meetings so that not only can you read the notes, but watch the recording. And the combination of these things and a number of others really help all remote with the team spread out across the world work quite well.
How does this work with the planning? Because for some things, it's much easier for people to be, on a meeting together, discuss potential questions, challenges, or I don't know, solutions that they propose for whatever new feature is being developed. How does that part work?
We do a lot of discussions and debating async as well, where we'll put it in GitLab issues and have threaded conversations about them. We try to make that the SSOT or the single source of truth rather than doing that in Slack or Google Docs, etc. We use the product itself to build the product and to discuss it. And that works really well because most of the time people get to really think through what they're going to say and their critique and their ideas. But it can be hard as well to make a decision when there's divergent opinions in that async mode. So that's where the meetings come into play, where not everybody can attend every meeting. And that's where we'll also be sure to assign a DRI, or what we call a directly responsible individual, where they're responsible for listening to everyone's opinions, responding to them, maybe not agreeing, but responding, thanking them for their feedback, telling them what they agree with, what they don't, etc., and then making the decision and being accountable for the decision. So we'll do that. And when it's a really crucial decision across many people, we're in different time zones, especially, we'll do that same meeting twice, sometimes 3 times for the Americas time zones, for EMEA time zones, and APAC or JPAC time zones. And sometimes re-review things multiple times, but that makes sure that everybody has, if they want to have a synchronous voice, synchronous being in a meeting versus asynchronous, they can do that, and we have those discussions. You can't always make everyone happy all the time, of course. So that's why it's key to for the DRI to always respond to all feedback and tell them, and not only tell them what they agree with and what they don't, but also say what they're reasonably going to do. Don't placate is one of my guidelines for myself and for my team. Don't placate somebody who disagrees. If you're not going to do it, tell them why, and that really helps.
And time-wise, how does this look like? For example, if you're planning some new feature in the security team, you need to coordinate with multiple people in different parts of the company. So what are the steps that you take? How do you start? Do you start asynchronously, directly communicating on the product itself and then following up with a meeting? Or do you start with some form of meeting at, within some department and then continue the process from there?
We try to not have gating meetings. either to start things or continue things or finishing things, it's sometimes still needed. But we try to avoid that. And the way to do it is by having DRIs on who sets the direction. So we have product managers who set the direction for the engineering teams because they're understanding the market and the customer needs, and they'll then document it. And then the engineering managers, or the engineering manager and the engineers on the teams will start breaking it down into the sub items of work, the issue epics and issues, and then collaborating with their stable counterparts, like and the UX and design team, the software testing team, the support team, infrastructure team, whoever it requires, the security team, and then working on them iteratively. And so we are really, really big on minimal viable changes to move things forward, not creating a big plan and executing towards it, but instead small changes that we implement, build, implement, deploy, and then learn from, so that many people can work on things in parallel and not be stuck on each other or gated or waiting on others, and still bring it together over time. That's one of the challenges of the product managers and engineering managers, is to bring it together over time when people are stuck or when things are potentially incompatible or go off track a bit. And we get so much done at GitLab, which is so interesting, but it's hard to predict when things are going to be done. It's hard to predict the elapsed time. That sometimes can be a challenge, but that's why we're so iterative. We do releases we do monthly releases. I think the company has done a monthly release every month. I don't know for how many months, but it's been for years and years and years. And if something doesn't make the release, we do not change the date of the release. It goes into the next release, or perhaps a dot release. We'll do dot releases as well. So the combination is we try to not have gating meetings because they're inefficient with a global team, and also with it can make it so that the louder voices in a meeting, the more extroverted folks, maybe get an outsized say in what's discussed. And when we do it more asynchronously in writing, the people who are a bit quieter in meetings but have a lot of important things to say can collaborate. So we try to avoid having gating meetings to do that planning, but they still happen, of course. And we record them when they do.
And that's an excellent point for people who are less open to contribute to meetings directly, but then when they think things through and write it down, it makes much more sense. So a lot of ideas come up that way. Was it like this always? I mean, focusing firstly on async communication, then meetings, or at some point GitLab decided to change? I know you're not there since the beginning, but maybe you have some info on that.
The culture of the company has we've iterated on it over the last 4 years that I've been here, but it's been pretty much the same is avoiding, meetings are a second choice or a third choice, not the first choice for communication and making decisions. And it does, occasionally you do need that meeting, but also in these threaded conversations, like sometimes in issues, we'll make a change, a proposed change, and the issue or merge request, if we're talking about a change to the company's public handbook or private handbook or other things, it will turn into an issue with hundreds of threads, and that's not efficient. So it doesn't happen that often. I haven't seen one in quite a while. When it does happen, we have a process to say, okay, we're cutting off the normal collaboration on issues and say we turn them into a manager mention issue or merge request, where if anybody comments, they have to mention their manager, and it's their manager's job to read through their feedback and comment rather than all going to the DRI. And I was the DRI on one of those items in the past, and there were hundreds of comments and pros and cons. It was great. Got such great feedback. It was when implementing, for example, more than a year ago, we were doing changes to help detect and prevent crypto mining abuse on the GitLab platform. And we were debating internally massively on ways to do that, and settled on requiring a credit card before you could use our compute resources, our free compute resources. We weren't charging people, but it was a good way to validate the people and dissuade. Doesn't block the attackers, but it dissuades them. And there was so much discussion. There are better ways to do it. What about people who don't have credit cards in certain parts of the world, or students, or et cetera? And it was a great debate, but I probably spent a good 40 hours in 80 in 2 weeks just responding to things. But you know what? It made it stronger. We ended up with a better solution. And overall, it was very successful. And we were successful in delivering it very quickly, which we needed to. We got great feedback from the public. We not only do great transparency internally at the company, but also with the public. And we got some feedback we weren't expecting, both in two ways. One is some people were very frustrated with it, that the free service required this validation, but also we got a lot of support from the community saying, don't get mad at GitLab, get mad at the attackers.
Mm.
GitLab and other companies like GitLab have to do things like this. So, but it was, we did that with few meetings, and that was a really big initiative that involved collaborating with people across the company with very varied opinions and no obvious answers, no obvious directions that were perfect. There's a lot of iteration and a lot of trade-offs that needed to be taken. And we did relatively few meetings to do such an important thing.
And do you feel at some point a meeting would have been more productive, or do you think that in any case async is better option?
Well, in that case, so we're gonna, I believe I did have twice a week meetings on that, mostly with the executive team, with an update on it to say, here's the status of it, and here's what we're doing. And it was partially somewhat to inform them because they wanted to know what the status was. It was partially also to reconfirm the support for the initiative because it has its pros and it had its cons. And you know, occasionally people who are unhappy with any particular decision that had been made would escalate it up their reporting structure. And I needed support not only widely at the company, but also from the executive. So if they got that question of why are we doing it this way or why are we not doing it that way, they could ask me those questions and I could then tell them the reasons why so then they could get it to their group. And that's a thing that it's those kinds of interactive real-time discussions, it's much harder to do that asynchronously versus synchronously. So that we still did have a meeting on that. I think it was twice a week for half an hour. We didn't discuss that for half an hour. We discussed that and other things, but it did work. It wouldn't have been as successful without doing that.
Okay. You created the team ops framework based on everything that you are doing at GitLab for years now. If you were to summarize what the framework is and how companies can utilize it, what would you share?
Yeah, so the company created Team Ops, which is a rebranding or iteration on the previous years ago, and I'm a big fan of it because I see it work so well. And it's also the documentation on it is public in the GitLab handbook, and there's also some free training that anybody can register for and do. We require it for employees, but it's open to the public. And the key things are to write everything down, make meetings optional, record meetings, have agendas for meetings, never, as I mentioned, never review slides in a meeting, but instead discuss what people have reviewed in advance, and a number of other things. Let's see what I haven't mentioned in there already. Like, there's a concept of disagree, commit, and disagree, where we want a lot of feedback, but then at a point there's a time to make a decision. Then you need to commit to the decision made. And then if you have new feedback where we learn new things, continue to disagree. It's easy to disagree and disagree and disagree and disagree. That commit part is really important. And you want to get people's feedback, but you also need to commit. So disagree, commit, disagree is really important. Having short toes is a term we use, where we do so much communication and writing. It can be hard to determine tone. And you know, assume positive intent. Don't be easy to offend and assume that people have positive intent, because they almost always do, even though it may not feel that way if your favorite thing is not getting the priority that it should be, for example. So another is transparency is so important. If things are not as transparent, either externally to the public when appropriate or internally at the company, then people can't get the information they need, or they also can worry quite a bit about what's going on and how decisions were made. So the more we can make things transparent, the better, because then it lets people really contribute, give their feedback, and have them understanding, and also have psychological safety, because they can look at how decisions were made, even though if they weren't a part of it. And that really helps quite a bit.
Let's talk a bit about the onboarding as well, because I think all of this relates. Are people self-onboarding? How do you manage new hires?
So yeah, and it is, what we do is we have onboarding issues using the GitLab product itself with issue templates. And it has a huge long list of stuff for people to do, and it is overwhelming for new team members. We tell them that up front. So we break it up into required things and optional things, and also priorities on those things now versus in your first week, second week, third week, in the future, etc. And we also give them, that not only have a manager to help them through, but also give them a mentor, an onboarding buddy or mentor to help them with those things. And it really helps them to get up to speed, prioritize what they're doing. It's a lot of reading, it's a lot of videos, and we set the expectation you are going to be overwhelmed by this. It is drinking from the fire hose, but that's the truth for everyone. One of the last tasks in the onboarding is to make a recommendation to improve the onboarding. Where GitLab, everyone can contribute. These are one big tenet of the company. So one of the things they do is they actually make a recommended change to the template. And the templates are also broken out by, there's templates per country because there's specific onboarding tasks in specific countries. There's onboarding tasks that are common across all team members. There's onboarding tasks for specific departments and sub-departments and groups. And so they can not only get the high level things and the per region things, but also stuff for their department and their group. And like for engineers, one of the examples is there's generally make this extremely small change to the product and see it go all the way through to production. And we usually make it just a textual change or something like that, but then they can see the whole process from end to end before they start doing, actual work. And that also gives them a lot of satisfaction that they see that one change go all the way through.
Nice. When it comes to, I know that I've had a guest from GitLab like a year ago, maybe. We were discussing a lot about the documentation and the habits of, updating, contributing, and everything throughout the company. So I know that people are encouraged to contribute to it, and everyone should maintain the documentation and the processes. How do you instill this kind of sense to contribute or willingness to write documentation, especially in engineers, because engineers are known for it's the most dreaded part of the job, basically. We want to code, we want to focus on solving problems. Documentation comes at the least priority. Do you screen for that? Do you mentor people? Is it something part of the culture that kind of...
I think it's part of the culture. It can be a challenge, surely. I've definitely seen that in many companies. And what I'd say is that with brand new initiatives, people don't seem to have a challenge with writing the documentation because they need to, do architecture descriptions, how components can interact with each other, et cetera, and it helps it be successful. Writing new documentation when developers see the need for it doesn't seem to be much of a challenge here, which is great. But maintaining it sometimes is. It tends to get stale, and going back and updating it, because it's not needed to succeed on a specific project. So we do comb through the documentation over time on both what's needed and also what exists to continuously update it as needed. And it does take a bit of sweeping to keep it up to date, though, that's for sure. And that's why also we try to have, both in our documentation and our handbook and how we operate as a company, is a single source of truth. That's another part of team ops. That's another key part. So you will not find a frequently asked questions at GitLab. Well, you might, but it's dissuaded. And you won't often see information duplicated. We try to have that single source of truth, which is never Slack. Not a negative on Slack, but it's hard to find things there. The single source of truth is the merge request or the handbook or the issue or the code in the product itself. So because once you duplicate information, you have to keep it up to date. in multiple places. And that's so hard to do, to keep it up to date in one place. So we have a lot of cross references and other things, but we really try hard to have that single source of truth. It helps so much.
And everything is centralized on the GitLab's platform, right?
It is either in the product itself, documentation, or the code, or in the company handbook as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes not just how engineering works, but also how the sales team operates, how the executive team operates, their process, the security team, marketing, legal, finance, and you can find things. So for an example, I'm currently working on learning a new part of how GitLab works in terms of onboarding new vendors. I need to onboard some vendors. And I got access to the procurement system, and I read the handbook pages that are public on how we do procurement and the ins and outs of it. I also asked for a mentor from the procurement team that I didn't know, what system to access, or, there's what the handbook says, and then there's questions I had about it, and also what
Mm-hmm.
actually happens, like how long does something take to get approved, for example. And I found readily found a volunteer to walk me through it and answer my questions when I get stuck, which is great. So it's when I'm done, I'm going to go through those handbook pages and for procurement and make some recommendations. So even though I'm not the responsible party
Mm-hmm.
to maintain those changes, I'm going to make recommendations. They may like them, they may not. They may take them as is. They may modify them as a user using it. And we do a lot of iteration like that, not just in the product and the documentation, but in how we operate as a company. Anyone can recommend changes, whether it's an employee or the public, which is great.
Yeah, that is great. How about like I'm always trying to get an edge for uh, teams that are listening to this, whether it's a corporate setting or a startup, and especially for smaller companies that don't have the time to invest in documentation right now. What are your suggestions to start with so that they can set the ground properly for scaling later on? When is the right time to start documenting instead of focusing on just building and sharing the processes on meetings because the team is still small?
I would do it. It's a great question. Amongst a number of great questions, Katerine, it's great. You're really making me think. Is I would do it, how to decide what to document when you don't have much, if anything, documented yet, is if you see the same question being asked often, document it. That subject. If you see problems coming about because something's not documented, where it could have helped if it was documented, I would start with that. And doing it very iteratively. So, I've been at companies of GitLab size and companies much, much smaller, 20, when I started the companies that previously, it was about 30 people. We didn't document that much, but I remember one of the first things that we documented at that company was our product plans, because there were so many opinions about the product plans on what features we're going to add and what the relative priorities were and what bugs we were going to fix, that the product plans were what the latest conversation that anyone had with anyone. That was the plan between those two people. It doesn't mean we had a consistent plan. It was causing real challenges. So we documented, here are our next priorities for the next 3 months. And it created this huge, no, it should be this. No, it should be that. I really don't like this. I really don't like that. What about my favorite thing? I don't like that other thing. And it forced that conversation to happen, to really not go in all these separate directions, and really help that company. Even though it was only 30 people, it really helped that company focus and get alignment on the priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And as that company grew, we started documenting like a common support questions, for example, from customers, where then we had that base of questions that, this is probably when it was about 200 people. So we didn't have to re-ask multiple times or get different answers, which was great. So I think it's based on need and looking at where things can be improved with documentation, predicting it some, doing iterative improvement as challenges arise, and see where documenting things helps. It takes time. It's definitely investment, but it makes teams much more effective, and it makes the company much more scalable as well.
I guess the same approach can be taken in larger companies as well, like corporate setting that doesn't have anything documented. If they want to start right now, I'm guessing the same approach would make sense, because if you don't do it iteratively, it's much harder and it will become overwhelming, and most likely they will just give it up.
Agreed. And then it gets stale and it's documented in multiple places. That single source of truth is very important. And it could be, goals, it could be standardized processes for not well understood or problematic things. Uh, like, for example, GitLab's hiring process is in engineering especially, is very, very structured. But it also lets us evaluate candidates. Say we list a new role in engineering, we might get 500 applicants in 2 weeks for one role. How do we vet that number of applicants effectively, both the time we spend vetting them, but also making sure we're pushing through to the next phase the most qualified candidates. So we don't want it to be ad hoc, and it needs to be flexible, but not ad hoc and not do it well, not do it fairly or not do it well. So we document the process for doing that. And it really helps. It helps with not only doing it effectively and efficiently, but also helps new people learn how to do those things and become part of the team, or new people that are not new to the company, but new to a process. Like I learned the procurement process. I read the handbook page.
Mm-hmm.
It mostly made sense to me. I was able to do it. I didn't have to go ask anybody to tell me how to do it. I asked just for help with somebody who could answer my questions. It's just an example, and a recent one that I figured out. I learned all about terms and conditions. I didn't know that much about terms, conditions, and payment terms, and why higher or lower payment terms are good for the vendors and good for us. But I read up on that, and I found most of it in the handbook on how we do it.
Have you had the experience, maybe at some other company before, of overdoing the documentation so that it becomes more of a burden than it helps the team?
I'd say it's overdone if it's stale. And at the previous company I was at, which was a security company with had various sizes over the years, but I think when I left was about 2,000 people roughly. And we used Confluence at that company. And we put something in there to say the Confluence pages had grown over 15 years at that company. It was a company that was acquired two of its largest competitors. And it was kind of a combination of three very large companies, all of which had 10 to 15 years of history behind them. So you can imagine the amount of documentation we had. And we put something in there to say a plugin for Confluence, say, when was this page last updated? And when was this last page confirmed by one of the authors or editors of the page that it's still accurate? And we had a thing pulling through and marking things as stale, and then eventually deleting it, where we'd inform the people, or archiving it. We didn't delete, but it moved it to a place where it wouldn't show up in searches. And that really helped to cull the content. And did people like hearing, oh, there's that favorite page that has not changed in 5 years. It's still valid. I don't need to update it, but I have to click the button to say it's still up to date. But they understood how that really helps to make sure we keep the pertinent content up to date. And that helped with that company quite a bit. I think we archived probably 40% of the Confluence pages by doing that. And it was when we did the first cleanup, and then every month we'd probably cull about 1% of the additional pages, because they just become out of date and nobody wanted to maintain them or confirm they were still valid.
So that's the
Occasionally
key, to keep doing that.
that wasn't needed anymore, that was still needed, we just pull it back from the archive. It would happen occasionally.
Yeah, that's fairly easy to do. I'd love to hear about your shadowing program. That's basically what fascinated me and inspired me to reach out, because, from your website, I just got the sense that you like to share your experience with people, help people out by, showcasing what you do at GitLab and what processes you follow, best practices. So I'd like to hear how that goes. And maybe if someone is that listens to this who wants to apply for that shadowing program, if that is an option, just share how to do it.
Absolutely. It's about 3 years ago, I did the CEO shadow program at GitLab, where any employee that's been at the company a certain period of time can shadow the CEO of GitLab, Sid. And I did it for 2 weeks, and it was so eye-opening. I learned so much. I sat in on not all of his meetings and communications, but most of them, and had an understanding of so much stuff that I wouldn't have been exposed to before. From marketing to finance, talking to investors, talking to customers, to dealing with challenges with, priorities across teams, et cetera. And I did that. I learned so much from it that I wanted to do it myself. I wanted to do a program myself. So about 2 years ago, year and a half, 2 years ago, I started it one as well for people that wanted to understand what it's like to be an engineering director at GitLab. And then employees of the company, team members, could shadow me, not in everything, but most of my meetings, and also review my agenda documents as I do meetings, look at what issues I'm working on and merge requests and the handbook, et cetera. And it worked really well. And I got a request from somebody outside the company to do it, which hadn't been done before at GitLab. So I started researching that and thinking about it and thought it might be a good idea. So I spent a good bit of time collaborating with the legal team and the corporate communications team on, can I open this up externally? So I was able to do that about a year ago. And now I have external shadows. Most of my shadows are actually external. In fact, the one I have today, who's listening to this now, is external, where they have to sign an NDA with the company, and they also take really good notes when they're shadowing, and they get access to less than an employee shadow would, but they shadow most of my meetings, learn quite a bit, and I also learn a lot from them. When you're explaining something to someone who has no idea what you do or the details, it makes you think about it and explain it differently and describe it differently. And so I get great reviews from the shadows on what they learn. And sometimes it's people in a similar role as I am, like an engineering director. Sometimes it's an engineer, individual contributor, an engineering manager. Sometimes it's people in very different kinds of roles that just find it interesting, such as people on support teams, then people in marketing, people in sales, et cetera. And I also asked them to optionally write a blog afterwards, which is the
I've
top
checked
way I find
several of them.
shadows. And anyone can apply outside the company as well. Just Google for GitLab Director Shadow, and you'll find the handbook page, GitLab handbook page that I maintain on that, and it has what the process is, how to shadow, what it is, and the little Google form to fill out to apply.
Do your meetings change when someone is shadowing, or is it everything like the same as if you would do it on your own?
It's mostly the same. And the shadows, what we'll do is we'll break up the content from things that a shadow can be a part of versus confidential information. And we save the confidential for the end of the meeting, and the shadow then drops before we start that part of the conversation. But I also loop the shadows into, what I'm working on. Whether it's I'm reading this article or I'm working on this merge request to set the priorities for one of the teams and ask the shadow for feedback. And it's so interesting getting an outsider's view, but also all their expertise. Like when I was working on the GitLab AI code completion feature called Code Suggestions. One of the shadows that I had was learning Python as a programming language. And I said, that's awesome. Let's get you in the beta for this thing that I'm working on. I loved your feedback. And he had great feedback on what it did well, what it didn't do well. And we used that to help improve the product. And that's just one of the things one of the shadows is interested in. Another shadow is interested in how OKRs are done, objectives and key results, when she was working on them. And I talked through the process, and she gave me great feedback. Like, Wayne, shouldn't OKRs be not binary and measurable? With what the quote unquote SMART goals. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. Half of my OKRs were not easily measurable, which makes them not great OKRs. So I got that great feedback from my shadow.
Now that you mentioned the OKRs, I'm curious to hear how you measure at GitLab. What's the process around priorities, measurements?
It's a number of things. have OKRs that start all the way up at the CEO level, and the CEO's direct reports. And all the OKRs inside the company are public inside the company. And so I can see the CEO's OKRs, the CTO's OKRs, my boss, then also my boss's OKRs, etc., and as can my teams. And then we organize them around results primarily. What can you measure? And what are the results? Whether it's delivering certain features to customers that are highly anticipated and needed, whether it's improving error rates or improving availability or reducing, support tickets, or some of my other ones are doing reviews with people to improve team member morale. When we did surveys with employees, is making sure we actually take action on the feedback they give us and then distributing it back to them. So it can be customer facing things or financial things, but it also can be more internal things about, the morale of teams and innovation as well. So I've got one OKR for myself. I've come up with 3 ways to improve the time to merge on my teams of merge requests. And I'm going to brainstorm on 3 ideas. Are we going to do any of them? I don't know, but I'm going to come up with 3 ideas and get collaboration on it to see if they're good ideas or not, and which one should move forward or not. So we always try to make them measurable, of improved by a percentage, or create X number of things, etc., and try to not have binary goals of do X by Y date. Well, sometimes that's all you. Sometimes that is a good way to do it, but generally it's, you want to look at the results that are coming out of it, not the do X by Y date goals, because it's not as measurable and it's not as effective as driving the results you want to see. So instead of do project X by Y date, it might be project X will have this impact on support tickets, or reduce support tickets by 25%. Make that the goal so you can keep focused on the goal. Maybe the team will have innovative ideas to do that in additional ways that'll even make it more successful.
And that's an excellent point, because oftentimes we just set goals like do this and you will do that, but you never know what the impact is and whether it was a project worth doing in the first place. So this is a great way to change the perspective, basically, to new projects. Are you setting the goals on your own, or is it in collaboration with, for example, the CTO, and then cascading down?
It's a combination of cascaded goals and ones that at each level people come up with. And sometimes they're in conflict with each other, because we do so much we make it so everyone works on their own, but also cascading to make sure they're consistent. So it's a combination.
Okay. Going back to your tips for other companies at various scales, companies that are using different types of tools, maybe we can share some, what tooling can they use? Is everything structured on GitLab, kind of like the golden rule, or maybe a combination of multiple other tools that companies may be using at the moment?
Yeah, at GitLab, we like to quote unquote dog food our own solutions, new features and existing ones. And we primarily use GitLab to build GitLab and to run the company. So, but we don't use GitLab for everything. We prefer, for example, to have discussions in GitLab issues versus in Google Documents or Slack, for example, but we still use Google Documents and Slack. They have their place. And spreadsheets, for computing things, etc. So we default to use GitLab first if you can. If not, and you feel you should give the team feedback on, you'd like to use GitLab for X, but you can't for wide reasons. So we can take that feedback and consider it. We use the Google suite of applications like Mail and Docs, etc. And then Slack as well, which works quite well. And then a multitude of other things that kind of hang off these for user authentication, in general, for procurement, like as I mentioned earlier, I learned the procurement system recently for handling insurance and pay, compensation and things like that. Some of that actually does link into and use the GitLab product as part of it. there's specialty solutions that we use as well. So for example, our bug bounty program, we use HackerOne, which is great. It's a great way to have the security community find security issues in GitLab, tell us about it so we can fix it, hopefully before attackers notice it, but also get paid to do so. And we use the HackerOne platform to do that. It interfaces with GitLab issues. We have synchronizers that synchronize that to GitLab issues back and forth so that we primarily work in GitLab internally to work those HackerOne issues, for example. And there's many examples that are onboarding issues. We don't have a onboarding system for people. We use GitLab issues and issue templates to do that. And it works out quite well. Sometimes there are very specialty systems that do a great job, and we'll definitely take advantage of those when it doesn't make sense to do it in GitLab.
And when it comes to security in distributed settings, so working with people across the world, is everyone using their own machine? Do you have any, I don't know, encryptions, access controls? How do you manage
We
that?
do a good bit of, we do a good bit of that is team members use a company issued laptop almost all of the time. And I believe it's standard on Mac and Linux. I don't think we currently support Windows. I'm not sure on that. And there's specific standards for user authentication, for two-factor auth to the machine, setting it up for encryption so that it's encrypted in case the device is stolen or lost, and having security software on the machines to make sure that malware is prevented, and all sorts of things like that. We do other things. It's not just the systems, it's also the people. We do phishing training and also phishing testing. We try to phish our own employees to see, and those who do phishing can be very, very clever, as can our security team. They caught me once. They got me to click on a link. I felt bad afterwards, but I did do it, and then I had to
It
take
happens to
retake
everyone.
required training, which is fine. And mentioned it's two-factor auth and single sign-on auth as well. It's really, really important. And two-factor auth with things that are appropriately strong security without creating a lot of inconvenience and usability for the users. But sometimes we will sacrifice usability for security, which is important due to the how prolific the attackers are and how clever they can be, because they're just as, it's easy to think that the attackers are not clever or not smart because they're attacking. That's what they're trying to do. It's not the case at all. They're just as clever and just as smart as the protector. So it's a bit of a cat and mouse game. So you have to keep that in mind, and the motivations. They can be very motivated. So we have to really keep track of that, and make sure we're doing things securely.
And how does it work for issuing laptops to everyone across the world? Or do you have entities in all of the locations?
We don't have entities in all the locations. It's in certain regions of the world, we will ship somebody a laptop, and in others, they buy it locally. And then, but either way, when a laptop is shipped, it's not shipped with software pre-configured. It's shipped right from the manufacturer. So whether someone buys it
Okay.
locally or it's shipped from us, we they go through the onboarding process to do it. And one of the steps, for example, is configure the laptop for encryption and send a screenshot, attach it to the issue showing that you did it. So then the security team will then review and just look at, oh, yep, they did it right, and then done. And then install the security monitoring software. You have to go through and go to a certain place to install, and then it goes and not only monitors security in real time, it also checks the current system configuration for two-factor auth, for encryption, and for other things.
Okay. And now that we mentioned like having entities or not, what's the legal structure for engaging these people? Are they all employees? Do you use local partners in different locations? Are they contractors?
This is not what I'm fully up to speed on all the details, but what my understanding is it's both employees in certain countries. GitLab has business entities in a number of countries, and when we hire people in those countries, they're employees. And then we also go through other companies in many countries as well where we don't have a business entity, And there we go through a third-party company. I think there's multiple of them. I think one of them is remote.com, where I
Mm-hmm.
believe they're employees of remote.com officially, but then they're still the same. They have all the same access and all the same benefits as where we have business entities. So that's why we
Mm-hmm.
call people GitLab team members versus employees, because some team members are employees,
Yeah.
some are contractors, but it's basically the same. We don't differentiate between the two. We also do a little bit of contracting where we have contractors who are not full team members, where it's temporary spot work or temporary work. So we do that occasionally as well. But it's
Mm-hmm.
primarily team members that are employees of business entities or through remote.com. And that's being able to hire in so many places is great for having a diverse team, for having a team that executes well across many time zones. It also makes it a lot of fun. I get to work with people around the world every day. And it's a different way of traveling, perhaps, of learning about different cultures and different regions. I learned about South African rugby from one person, from somebody in South Africa. I learned about the great places to do trail running in Auckland, New Zealand, and learned about the cultural um, all the various cultural aspects of weddings in India. It's just I find those things to be very entertaining.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was asking because that's the fun part, but on the other side, compliance is not as fun. So I was curious how you handle it with
And it is
the
challenging
legal
on a
structure.
region basis. Sometimes there's very unique things to certain countries that when it comes to can somebody in that country work after work hours for like on
Mm-hmm.
call? There's preferences, but also specific laws per country that we have to keep track of, or how retirement benefits work, or a multitude of things, how taxes
Yeah.
work, different per country. And that's a lot to keep track of. That's why GitLab does not hire everywhere. We
Mm.
hire in quite a few countries, and it does change over time. Um, but that's why we hire, I'm going to say in 30 countries. I don't know if that's accurate, but it's probably approximately accurate. But adding another country takes work to work out all those other things, whether it's via business entity or through a company like remote.com.
Mm-hmm.
So we're very careful on that based on the skills, interests, and region needs, et cetera, when we do that.
All right. We are approaching the end of the session. I really enjoyed it. Do you have anything that you want to finish up with? Something we didn't get to mention in the discussion, but might be useful for people that listen to us?
Yeah, I'd say two things. Again, if you're interested in the Shadow program, just Google search for GitLab Director Shadow, and you'll find the handbook page uh, on information about it, and it's open to the general public, and anyone can apply. I'd say also um, if you are learning something new in software engineering, whether it's you're a very senior engineer and you're just learning a new library, or you're a junior engineer and learning a new language, give the GitLab code suggestions feature a try. It's I've been so impressed with how effective it can be, and it's effective in other use cases as well. It's so effective in how and impressive on how it can really be a partner to the developers as they learn new things and do things like it's great at writing test cases. Is it perfect? No. Does it hallucinate? Absolutely. All large language models do. So you can't always trust what it says, but it can really help. And I don't write that much code myself these days. I've used it a couple times when just writing some Python scripts, for example, to pull data and and compute some statistics, and it got it right most of the time. I forgot about certain libraries in Python to do things, and it made some recommendations as I did things that really helped me. So I'd give those a try. And lastly, check out the GitLab handbook. There's just a lot. The company, it astounds me at how transparent with the public the company is on how the company operates. We're not perfect, but we do document a lot of things that other companies can benefit from, whether it happens to be team ops or other ways the company operates in engineering or sales or marketing, et cetera. You can learn quite a bit. That's one of the things that attracted me to the company, is how public the company was and how much I had learned about best practices just from reading the GitLab handbook long before I ever became an employee.
That's amazing. It's also the thing that motivates me to keep inviting people from GitLab because I'm fascinated by the transparency and the level of documentation and async processes you have in place. So great.
Thanks, Katerina. It's been great, and I appreciate all the great questions. I do talks like this periodically, and you asked me some questions that I've never been asked before, which I really appreciate. It really made me think.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, Wayne, again for being my guest today. Thanks to everyone who joined us live. This will be on our YouTube channel very soon. So for everyone who wasn't able to attend, check it out there, and see you again next time.
Cheers.
Bye.